Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perdichizzi, and thank you for joining me as always. Really excited to have special guest back on the show, Mr. Matt Williamson. Matt, welcome back here to the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast.
Yeah, it's always a good time. We should do it more often. I appreciate the invite. Let's dig in, man. Lots to discuss since we talked last, obviously.
Yeah, obviously, really interesting rookie class, whether you look at it from a dynasty perspective, a redraft perspective, a blended perspective. So let's start right at the quarterback, because last year when I had you come on, we talked a little bit about Kenny Pickett. Obviously, you had some insight, Pittsburgh stuff. But this year, obviously, a more intriguing group of quarterbacks that were drafted this year. So let's start right at the Anthony Richardson discussion. When you look at a guy like Anthony Richardson, are you buying the hype / upside? Do you think he warrants for people who still have summer rookie drafts or even just thinking big term dynasty picture? Are we went through this, right, where everybody was all in on Trey Lance, and then that kind of flopped. Justin Fields is kind of hitting his stride and maybe even another level up there. Where do you kind of look at Anthony Richardson for what do you think his ceiling is? Do you think it's going to take some time to get there? How do you kind of view the Anthony Richardson discussion?
Yeah, I'm in. And I understand that he's very expensive, and I don't really hesitate to pay that price, whether it's redraft, best ball, dynasty, rookie drafts, whatever. And of course he could miss. I mean, there's no question about it. But you mentioned Fields, and I think right off the bat, Richardson's going to be, and from an NFL perspective, as hard to play against as Fields was when they were running him heavily. And frankly, has a lot more around him in Indianapolis than Fields did either of his first 2 years. Now, Fields at Ohio State was a better passer than Richardson. There's no question about that. I also think Richardson's a little bit better passer than often given credit for. I mean, I remember this with Lamar. I watched all of Lamar's throws after his rookie year. And when he would miss, sometimes he just missed so bad that people thought, wow, how does that happen? And there's some of those moments with Richardson. It's like, wow, he missed that guy by 10 yards. But an incompletion's an incompletion. I mean, what's the difference if he misses him by a yard or 10 yards? And I do think he's a better deep passer and overall prospect as a thrower than people give him credit for. And I love his landing spot. I mean, they have a good line. They're going to have a really, really good running game. I think their weapons are more than adequate. For him, I always call it a nest. Did a young quarterback land in a nice soft nest? And with that coaching staff and all the things I mentioned, pretty decent defense, I think that's a really good spot for him to thrive.
Yeah, and I think that the interesting discussion, and I've been talking a lot here, at S2S, is I don't really remember a year. Now, a lot of people had their rookie drafts, but some people still have them. I know I got a couple still lingering in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an interesting point because we usually see this wide discrepancy between a super flex rookie draft and a regular rookie draft, one quarterback where the top quarterback comes off the board. Personally, I've been saying I don't think there's this big difference with Anthony Richardson because he's such a unique prospect. Where do you kind of feel on that in a super flex? Is it Bijan over Richardson or Richardson over Bijan? And then if you talk about it, is it being one quarterback? How many other guys would you be willing to pull the trigger on before you would get to Anthony Richardson?
Well, I don't love this class as a whole. So a quarterback prospect like Richardson in single quarterback is probably getting inflated a little bit more than he would last year against Olave and Garrett Wilson and Jameson Williams and London and all those type of dudes. So I don't love this receiver class. In Superflex, I'm still with Bijan. I think he's that special. But Richardson is the only other one in that tier, if that helps. I think it's a question of who's number 3, not who the top 2 are. I'm sitting here and I just pulled up a list so I don't miss any. I mean, in terms of rookie draft as we stand at the end of June, one quarterback league, definitely Bijan, definitely Smith-Njigba, definitely Gibbs. I like Johnston more than Addison. I probably would still take both over him. Flowers, Kincaid, that's about it. But those last 2 or 3, if you're real quarterback needy, I would understand, and especially if you already have a tight end. And there's generally speaking, I think if Richardson came out last year, I think he's like the 10th pick in my rookie draft or the 12th pick in my rookie draft. This year, I think he's 5th or 6th.
Yeah, and I think you could really make the case that it varies based on league size, right? 10,
Hmm.
10 team, 12 team. I know I'm in 16 team leagues, and I think that pushes the value of quarterbacks up even in a one quarterback
Yeah.
setting. That I could see somebody saying 2, 3, 4 in an
Yeah.
extreme situation if you don't have a quarterback and maybe you have those other positions. So it's a really interesting discussion there with Anthony Richardson. Let's turn this to the other two main quarterbacks, which is Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. Did you have a clear preference between those two on film? And now where they've landed, do you see a big discrepancy between their fantasy value? Do you think there's a lot of fantasy difference between them? Do you think their upside is similar long term? How do you kind of view the Stroud versus Bryce Young discussion?
Yeah, I think they're very similar in all the above. As NFL prospects coming out, I thought they were very similar as dynasty assets, as fantasy assets, as rookie year for redraft. I think if I were to do ranks, they would be very close to one another. I don't think either one's going to run very much. And to me, that is really puts a ceiling on things. And I think both their situations aren't conducive to early season or early career success. Like I'm big on EPA and DVOA and things like that. Like I think the Panthers and Texans are going to clearly be bottom 8 in EPA per play, DVOA. I just don't think there's a lot of production on either offense. I give Houston credit. They've added some things, but there's not a lot of star power there, if any. I just think both these quarterbacks are set up to struggle early on.
Yeah, and I think you made the case. Their ceiling is capped. We see the top quarterbacks. Most of them have this running component, unless they're going to throw for 45 touchdowns, they need
Right.
that running component to really reach that ceiling. So I almost look at these guys, and I know it's a little bit of a different era, but like their ceiling could be capped out as like statistically passing wise, maybe a good Eli Manning year, a good Phillip Rivers year, a good Matt Ryan year, right? Like not maybe the MVP Matt Ryan year, but the other years where he might be quarterback 8, quarterback 9. Like I kind of don't see a scenario where they are consistently in that like top 6 to 8. Even if they hit their ceiling, they're probably more low QB1s and most likely probably low QB1s to somewhere like mid QB2. So it's interesting to kind of see them side by side. I think you're right. I don't think either of them are set up to quickly have a lot of success. I think they both have to work on the supporting cast. Offensive line in Houston's a lot stronger than than some rookie quarterbacks step into, but I think there's a lot that they still have to kind of fix around them until we see their best. Let's switch us over to some running back talk.
Well, one thing I have to throw out there too, though. I mean, I'm old school. I know I'm going to sound old and curmudgeon-y and set in my ways. But Bryce Young's size bothers me to no end. I'm sorry. All these guys that are a little on the small side, Tua, Lamar, Kyler, they're all struggling to finish seasons lately, and he's much smaller than all of them. It might not affect his rookie year at all, but 2 years from now, we might be like, why isn't this guy ever on the field?
Yeah, and that's a very valid point. He played behind an Alabama offensive line. We know Alabama always has an elite offensive line. So like he hasn't had to deal with that. Like, and let's be honest, the guys hitting them in college, while they're good prospects, a lot of the guys in the SEC, it's not the same every single time, every single hit at the NFL level. Obviously a very dramatic difference. And like you said, the track record of some of these guys these size, it's not ideal in terms of staying healthy. So that's going to be something, really to follow closely there, when it comes to the Bryce Young. And maybe that's a little determining factor between trying to pick between Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. Like obviously CJ Stroud, much bigger in terms of height and weight and stuff like that. That could be a little bit of a tiebreaker for somebody if they're picking between them. Let's shift this over to running back. We've already talked about Bijan and how special of a prospect he is. Do you think he could hit the ground running and immediately this year be in contention for the best running back in fantasy football? Is there anybody off the top of your head, if you were making like a dynasty overall running back ranks, that you would prefer who was currently in the NFL right now over Bijan? Or is he that special of a prospect with age on his side that he would be the guy above all else in dynasty in terms of running backs? And do you think he has a legit chance this year maybe to push to be the RB1 even in redraft?
I'm all in. Yeah. I mean, I think he's spectacular. And even when Tyler Algier, who I think will get some touches, is on the field, I think Robinson will be in the slot or catching passes. I don't want to say he's Christian McCaffrey, but I expect a lot of receptions. I kind of already mentioned it. In any format rookie draft, he's still my 1-1. of dynasty running backs, he is number one for me as well. I mean, just flat out redraft, old school. I'm taking, I think, McCaffrey and Eckler over him, but that's it. And I'm still considering that because of the age difference. Really good line he's running behind. A run dedicated team. I mean, a quarterback that should dump it off to him all the time. And just as you mentioned, the most special of talents.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. Like, if he stays healthy, I don't see a scenario where he doesn't get 1,700 total yards. Like 100 a week doesn't seem like if he played all 17. Obviously, we know that doesn't always happen with running backs for sure. But like, I don't see a scenario where 1,700 yards is not in the cards if he plays 17 games. And I don't think 18, 19, or 2,000 is unrealistic if he plays that. Like, that's where I think this is heading. So I'm right there with you. He'd be my clear RB1 in overall dynasty running back ranks. I'm right there with you. I think I would take McCaffrey ahead of him in redraft, but I'm not sure. If you want to play a little safer, I get McCaffrey. But if you're looking for, like, I'm looking for that X factor, I'm looking for that difference, that guy who could even exceed his first round value, I think it could be Bijan. Because I think next year, when we're talking about who's the first pick in redraft, I think we'll still have the wide receivers, Justin Jefferson. But I think it'll be, is it Justin Jefferson? Is it Bijan Robinson? I think that's where this is heading. And that's how special. And like you said, great offensive line. Obviously we'll see about the quarterback situation, but they got some other skill players that teams got to account for sure, which is going to also help Bijan, right? Because, like when the Giants got Saquon, they had Odell, but he was dealing with injuries and stuff like that soon after they got Saquon there. And, and they didn't have nearly as good of an O-line as the Falcons do. So I think it's going to be fun to kind of watch him. If we go away from Bijan and look at a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, what do you think Detroit's plan is for him, right? Like, are we thinking like an Austin Eckler, Alvin Kamara type role? Are we thinking less carries than that, but more involved in the passing game? Obviously they surprised people taking him as early as they did. So you'd like to think, rational thought is that they have a big role for him planned.
Yeah.
Do you see that in year one and moving forward?
Yeah. I like the Eckler and Kamara comparisons, but just watching them on tape and height, weight, he's not as bulky. He's not as hard to get on the ground. I mean, Kamara in particular is really hard to knock off his pins in his prime and can handle a lot of inside runs over the course of the game, plus the receiving stuff. Eckler's really, really well built, low to the ground. So I don't think Gibbs is as much every downy as those guys. I still think he's a satellite player, a specialty player. But I love that they love him. You know what I mean? Like, that's a really good offense with a great O-line, a phenomenal play caller. And if they love him to take him as early as they did, he's going to see the field a lot. And strictly from a fantasy perspective, though, I don't love that Jamal Williams scored, 19 or 17 or 100 touchdowns last year. Like, I don't think that's going to be Gibbs' role. I think Montgomery's going to be that goal line guy. And that's eats into a lot of production.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that I think, even if Montgomery doesn't get nearly as many as Jamal Williams, right? A lot of things had to line up for Jamal Williams to have that many touchdowns. When they're at the 3-yard line, I think we know who the running back on the field is going to be. So you're talking about Jahmyr Gibbs is going to have to find his way to touchdowns from maybe beyond the 5, beyond the 8, right? Beyond the 10, big plays, pass catching plays from inside the red zone, but maybe not inside, that 5-10 yard line area. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be something that if those big plays don't come in terms of touchdowns, that's going to impact his overall value. I do expect him to be very involved in the pass game, obviously, especially at the beginning of the year with Jameson Williams out. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see how they divvy up that. And I agree with you. All year, people were making that Kamara come. Kamara's 215 and a very different style player. Yeah. His measurements line up more with Eckler, but even as you said, Eckler, he just looks a little bit bigger and more physical, even though the height weight is about the same. So I think more Eckler than I do Kamara, because I think Kamara is a different type of body type altogether. And as you kind of made there, let me group these 3 for you. We'll do 2 more running back questions, and I'll group them like this: Devin Achane, Kendre Miller, Zach Charbonnet, right? All those day 2 backs. Interesting landing spots. Obviously, the Dalvin Cook is hovering over Devin Achane, so let's leave that out of the mix for right now. Obviously, most there and Jeff Wilson there. Kendre Miller, we just talked about Alvin Kamara, maybe a suspension looming. Jamal Williams there. And then the Zach Charbonnet pick, with the year after Kenneth Walker. Are you in on any of these running backs? Are you staying away? Like, what's your thought process on this trio of backs?
I want nothing to do with A-Chain at what he costs. And again, this is just like Boy Williamson's the old curmudgeon, former scout, Bryce Young conversation. He's just too small for me. I mean, how many backs at 185, 5'9", under 190 have really been fantasy relevant over the last 20 years? And he has to score from distance, and I'm sure he will 5 times during the year, and he'll get some jet sweep action. And I understand what he brings to the table, but I just don't see a track record for me to invest what it costs to get A-Chain on my team. And in many rookie drafts, I have traded out of that neighborhood to somebody coming to get him, and I'm thrilled to do it. Now, this isn't necessarily Charbonnet or Miller's fault, but I end up taking them reluctantly at 110 in my rookie draft, 111. And it's back to my point before, where I think most years, if these guys come out and go in the situation they're in right now without a clear starting role, and people forget Jamal Williams is in New Orleans too. It's not just Kamara to overtake. I think these guys most years are mid-second round rookie picks, and you have to take him at the end of the first, which I don't love, but it's really hard to trade out of the 111 when they're the best two on the draft. Sometimes you just have to bite the bullet.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And, the Charbonnet one is fascinating because I wasn't all in on Charbonnet. I had some question marks about his ability to stop and start. And I think he had a little bit of, a good offensive line, a good scheme there at UCLA to really build up and generate that speed. And then we saw some of the footwork. It's pretty nifty for a bigger guy. If that's not there, I have some questions about how he translates. Like, I think Kenneth Walker was a far superior talent coming out.
100%.
I might be. Yeah. So like, that was my question for you. Like, do you see that? Because I know there was a lot of people, a lot in the industry, people I really respect who really love Zach Charbonnet. I wasn't that high on him. So for me, I still think Kenneth Walker's the guy there, even though Seattle made another investment. It sounds like you kind of agree on that.
I really do. And I didn't dislike Charbonnet. It didn't sound like you did either. He's fine. I mean, he's probably one of the best 32 backs in the world. I mean, I think he's more Alexander Madison than he is Dalvin Cook. I know they have different styles, but where I think Walker's more Dalvin Cook than he is Alexander Madison, so I've noticed since the Seahawks drafted Charbonnet, I've picked up more and more shares of Walker. I just think that's the approach, not necessarily, I have to stay away from Charbonnet. It's everyone's a little down on Walker. Now's my last chance to pounce. Whether it's best ball, I keep drafting Walker best, left and right in best ball. I picked them up in a draft day trade in Dynasty because people are down on him. I think, Pete Carroll tells you what he wants to do. I mean, they were the heaviest, or one or two, heaviest 12 personnel team in the league last year. Well, you draft a zone runner and a third receiver. They're going to put 3 receivers on the field and run zone stuff out of spread. But I think Charbonnet is just going to be the 2, and Walker's going to thrive in that situation.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'd be gobbling up Kenneth Walker wherever I could. Last running back question. Is there one from the trio of Roshan Johnson, who went early day 3, and then the other two backs, Tyjae Spears in Tennessee or Tank Bigsby? If you're going to take a little bit more of a long-term approach, because obviously all of them Roshan's kind of mixed in with 2 other, veteran, or Herbert's a little bit of young player. Obviously got, Derrick Henry, and you got Travis Etienne there. Is there one of that trio that if you were going to pick between them, who would be the one?
I'm much more comfortable taking the 3 of them, especially Spears and Bigsby, where they're going. If I have to take one, though, it's Tank Bigsby. And okay. I keep going back to size. I mean, there's so much data out there that if you're a reasonably sized back that can catch the ball, you're highly fantasy relevant. And I know Travis Etienne's there, and Bigsby's not a proven receiver, but I think he offers enough as a receiver. You probably even watched more tape of him than I did. I thought Auburn's scheme, line, blocking did him no favors whatsoever. And everyone assumes Etienne's this great receiving back. He's not. I mean, he's a very...
Never has been, too.
No.
One of the biggest misconceptions out in the fantasy industry. I don't know how it started.
Yeah.
He really was. He once upon a time even said he felt uncomfortable catching the ball. Like, that was
right.
A quote from Travis Etienne, and it was weird how he's kind of morphed into people thinking he's like an Alvin Kamara type player in terms of pass catching ability. And he's just not.
Not even close. Very rudimentary route runner, fights a football. I mean, just because he's smaller and super fast, everyone assumes he's a good receiver, and he really isn't. So is he an every down back? I don't think so. I could see Bigsby getting equal carries, goal line stuff. So I have a lot of Bigsby stock.
Yeah, I'm a big Bigsby fan. He was in my top 4 running backs in this draft class. And he actually even went a little bit higher. I thought he was maybe going to fall to day 3, so I was excited to see him get some day 2 draft capital. Let's take this over to the pass catchers. Let's do one tight end question because I think we can kind of morph the top 4 into kind of together. We know Dalton Kincaid went round 1, and then we know the next trio: Sam Laporta, Michael Mayer, Luke Musgrave. All went then early into day 2, like the first 10, 12 picks into day 2. So all 3 of them go. Are you into any of these rookie tight ends in terms of where they're costing? Is there one or two that on film that you liked a little bit better, or you love the landing spot? Some quick thoughts on that top of the tight end class.
I adore the tight end class. I mean, it amazes me that my Steelers were able to get Washington as late as they did. This was as good a tight end class, not even at the top, but depth, day 2 into day 3. I think when it's all said and done, there's going to be 8 or 9 starting tight ends from this class 5 years from now, that are established, good. Austin Hoopers are better, quality players, not maybe not the best players in the league. I think at the cost, the one that I end up the most with is Musgrave. And I think that Kraft going there scares some people, but there's so much opportunity in that receiving core as a whole. I really am impressed with the way he opens things up downfield. He's a natural athlete that everyone probably knows. I mean, he has this background in many sports instead of skiing and things like that. I think things come natural to him. I love the way he moves. He's 6'6". I mean, we're splitting hairs because I adore this class, but the one that I definitely end up the most with is Musgrave for the cost.
Interesting that you said that because I've been on an island. He was actually my favorite tight end pre-draft on film alone. I know
he was mine too. Size. I can't believe
really?
It.
Okay.
Yeah, he was number 1.
Yeah. I think in 3 years, I think in about 3 years, if we look back and say great tight end class, but who's the best? I think his ceiling. I think his ceiling could be higher than the other guys who I like them all. Yeah. Right? Like you're talking about.
Right.
Real quick before we go to a quick wide receiver tour question. I feel like people in rookie drafts are acting like Brenton Strange is just a blocking tight end. And any thoughts on Brenton Strange? Like, is he a guy you got a chance to watch Penn State a decent amount? Because I feel like
Penn
people
State's
aren't
on here
really,
all the time.
I feel like people are really just kind of brushing him off to the side. Do you think that could be a mistake, or do you think he's more blocker and the pass catching is not really going to be fantasy relevant?
He's below. I mean, he's probably my 6th or 7th tight end, and a lot of it isn't his fault. I just think Ingram has come into his own and is somebody that I'm getting a lot in redraft. So I think Ingram is a buy right now that they're starting to, expand his role. And Strange is a fine prospect. I don't have anything really bad to say about him. I just don't love his situation there. I mean, best case scenario, is he the 5th or 6th leading receiver on that team this year? You know what I mean? Like, there's not a lot of opportunity,
Yeah, it's just interesting. Jacksonville made a pretty aggressive draft pick there in the end of the second round. So most of his value probably will be tied long term to whether or not Ingram re-ups after this year. Obviously he's playing, I think, on the tag this year. So we'll see there. Let's take this to the wide receiver.
I thought they overdrafted him, and it sounds like I'm just bashing Strange. I looked at him as a 4th rounder that they took too early. And okay, I mean, I think he's a good player. I just would have drafted him that early.
Yeah, agree. And I think that's where people struggle with, did they draft him that early? Were other teams interested? And I think it's hard then to say, okay, he sits behind Ingram. They have a lot of wide receivers there now. So it'll be interesting to see if he gets a shot. If we take this to the wide receivers, you mentioned Jackson Smith-Njigba before, and you mentioned the wide receiver class you not being as in on as past years. Do you think it's a clear JSN number 1 teardrop to that next group of guys, or do you think someone's close to JSN?
No, I think he's number 1. I was a little shocked he lasted as long as he did on draft night. I thought he'd go in the top 15 or so. I think he's a phenomenal prospect. I'm not taking him in redraft very often because I think he's going to be their 3rd leading receiver as a rookie, but then quickly change that and be a 100 catch a year type of dude before it's all said and done. I think that's the talent. That's the profile. Johnston's my clear number 2. And most of that is because these other guys are so small, but also if you look at the Chargers cap situation going forward, it's awful. I mean, I don't know that they can retain Allen or Williams, especially after they pay Herbert. So Johnson has a real easy path after this year to be maybe the number one there, or at worst, the number two on one of the best quarterbacks offense.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Now, I agree with you on JSN. His value, his ADP in redraft is way too high for me. And I love JSN, the prospect, but like he's going like 5th, 6th round in redraft, like ahead of Tyler Lockett. I just don't think that's something that I'd feel comfortable at all in redraft or best ball setting.
Paul, I don't know if you agree with me, but like I can't imagine checking the start box Sunday morning on JSN. And if he's my 6th round pick, I mean, I got to start the guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Like, I've been surprised. Yeah. I've been surprised where he's going that high right now, because if he doesn't catch 90 passes, he's not going to check off that value as a 6th round pick. Like he's going to have to catch 85, 95 passes his rookie year. I'm not sure I'm ready to say that's coming his rookie year. I think eventually it's coming, just not his rookie year. You've talked a lot about size.
I want to buy him in Dynasty in like week 10.
Yes. Agree completely. Right, you've talked a lot about size and stuff like that. Do you look at a guy like Jonathan Mingo, who he on film, he had some fans, analytic community, not so much. Do you look at a guy like Mingo, and do you think he's closer to, in terms of fantasy dynasty value, do you think he's closer to the other round 1 wide receivers, Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, or do you think he's closer to that giant group of day 2 wide receivers? Obviously he was really early day 2 Mingo, but do you think he's more close to the round 1 guys, or a little bit more mixed, or he deserves to be more mixed in with the day 2 guys, the Jaden Reed, the Jalen Hyatt, the Josh Downs, and that group?
I don't want to say right in the middle, but it's kind of right in the middle.
Okay.
And I'm going to avoid your question slightly. Reed, Mingo, and Tillman have been the guys I've been targeting.
Okay.
I really think they all have nice pass. I think they have good skill sets. I think that all of them should be pretty relevant. I think Reed may even lead the Packers in receptions this year. I think Mingo's has a little bit of Treylon Burks to him. People want to say he's A.J. Brown. That's way too rich for me, but I like him.
Agreed.
But I do think they'll throw him the ball behind the line of scrimmage. I think they'll get the ball in his hands. And I like Tillman's game a lot, but that's another team that's super cash strapped with Watson's contract going forward. Like, what if Amari Cooper's not there next year? It might be Tillman and more, so those are the 3 guys that I liked a lot coming out of school. I like their landing spots, and I'm trying to grab them pretty much every chance I get. Once in a while, Mingo's pretty pricey, but that's because this class isn't great.
Yeah. And if we
I don't want Rashee Rice. Like I want all those guys way over Rashee Rice.
I think the last year I was screaming from the hilltop that Sky Moore got pushed up too high. And I think again, we're doing this. The fantasy community, I think, is doing the same thing again with Rashee Rice. Like, because he's attached to Mahomes, people just want to think he's going to step in and be the guy. And who's to say it's not Tony or Sky Moore this year, or he just spreads it around, and none of them are very fantasy viable as the offense still runs, through, Travis Kelce. So yeah, I've been avoiding Rashee Rice. His cost got a little bit too expensive for me. If we just, last question of the day, if we circle back to the other 2 round 1 guys, Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison, is it size concerns again? Is there one you clearly like between them? Is it concerns about the passing offense in Baltimore, or Addison never really stepping into the alpha role, obviously with Justin Jefferson there? Or maybe some quick thoughts on Addison or Zay to round out the show.
Yeah, and again, I think they're perfect examples of most. Like if they came out last year, they're the 110, they're the 111, they're maybe the early 2nd round pick in the NFL, not a first. And I like them both. I really like the way Flowers plays. Everyone in the world knew the ball was going to him at Boston College. It didn't matter. I think that the Ravens will throw the football enough that it's not going to be a super shortage. But him and Odell and Bateman are all like worth the exact same almost, like in best ball. And that's a hard puzzle to figure out right now. I'm an Addison believer, but I think he might be the 3rd receiver on that team because they adore Hawkinson and traded for him with a plan. Their size worries me a little on both these guys, but less than it used to. I just killed a running back and a quarterback for size. It doesn't bother me as much with receivers nowadays. I mean, Jack Tatum's not taking their head off over the middle of the field anymore, and they can get down and you can play small ball. But I've found, and maybe that's just because of my dynasty teams. I have 8 dynasty teams. Most of them are pretty darn good, and some of them are really, really bad. So I haven't had a lot of picks at like 1-5. So I don't think I've drafted Addison or Flowers yet.
Yeah, and that's kind of where they're going, that 1.5 to 1.8 range, give or take there. Yeah, great stuff, Matt. As always, thanks again for hopping on here. Please, I'm sure most of my audience follows you. Let them know where they can follow you. Anything you want to plug that you're working on or you have coming up here in the summer months here as we start heading towards the next football season.
Yeah, my Twitter is at Williamson NFL. Ryan McDowell and I host Locked On Dynasty. If you're into Dynasty, we have a lot of fun. We've been together now for a long time. And also on the Locked On Network is Peacock and Williamson. We come by every day just talking NFL. And I do a lot of other things, but just hit the Twitter spot and you'll find me.
Absolutely, guys. Make sure you're following Matt and all his great content. So on behalf of Matt, on behalf of our sound tech engineer, David Nakano, and myself, thank you for joining us. And we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.